The glass slipped from her hand before she reached the door. It didn't shatter, it hit the marble floor of the grand ballroom and bounced once, spilling champagne in a clean arc across the tiles, and in the half-second that every head near her turned toward the sound, nobody reached for her. Nobody asked if she was all right. 500 people in silk and diamonds, and not one of them registered Bella Adaeze as anything worth looking at. She bent to pick it up herself. That was when she heard the room change. Not loudly. The music kept playing. The chandeliers kept burning. But something shifted in the air the way air shifts before lightning, a held breath, a collective stillness, and when Bella straightened and turned, she understood why. Jeon Ha-rin was crossing the room. Not walking. Crossing. For seconds, maybe 5, from the far edge of the ballroom to where she was standing, and every person between them had parted without being asked, without being touched, because that was what rooms did when Jeon Ha-rin decided to move through them. His jaw was set. His eyes, dark, absolute, the kind that had reportedly made a sitting minister weep in a closed room, were fixed on her and nothing else. His hand closed around her wrist. Warm. Certain. Not painful, but not a question either. She turned to face him. And Bella Adaeze, who had spent 20 years learning how to be the background of every room she entered, felt, for the first time in her life, like the only thing in the frame. Welcome to Venom and Velvet Stories, besties. If you love dark romance, tap like and subscribe, then let's dive in. It started 3 weeks before that night, on a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain and regret. Bella had not planned to be in Seoul. She had not planned to be anywhere, particularly since her mother died. She had simply moved through her life in London with the efficient grief of a woman who had learned young that falling apart was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had a job she was good at, grant writing for a small arts nonprofit, and a flat with a drafty window she kept meaning to fix, and 2 friends she loved in the abstract way of people who communicated mostly in voice notes sent at midnight. She had come to Seoul for one reason. Her mother's estate lawyer, a meticulous man named Mr. O who spoke to her in the careful cadence of someone explaining simple things to someone he assumed was simple, had located a life insurance payout from a Korean investment account Grace Adaeze had opened in the 90s and never mentioned to anyone. It was not a large sum. But it was her mother's hands, her mother's overtime, her mother's particular form of love which had always expressed itself in provisions made silently and in advance. And Bella had crossed time zones to collect it herself, because it felt like the last conversation she would ever have with her. She signed the papers. She held the envelope for a long moment in the sterile corridor outside Mr. O's office, and then she put it in her bag and straightened her spine and walked toward the elevator. She turned a corner. The man in the elevator lobby was on his phone, speaking in a low voice, not looking up. 2 other men stood nearby in the particular arrangement of people paid to be a wall. The man on the phone wore a charcoal suit that had no right to fit a human body the way it fit his, perfectly, expensively, like an argument. And he had the jaw of someone who had been told no a very few times in his life, and had found all of those occasions instructive. He looked up as she passed. Bella looked back. That was her first mistake. His gaze was direct in a way that bypassed social convention entirely, not aggressive, not flirtatious, just fully present, the way very few people were ever fully present in a room. Like whatever else was happening, she was the most interesting fact in his immediate environment, and he intended to understand why. Bella looked away and walked to the elevator and pressed the button and did not look back. She did not see him take one step toward her before his phone pulled him back. She did not hear him say, to the man beside him, "Find out who she is." She should have left Seoul the next morning. Her flight was booked. Her bag was half-packed. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed and held her boarding pass on her phone screen and thought about the drafty window and the voice notes and the particular quality of her London silence, which was the silence of a life that was fine. She thought about a man in a lobby looking at her like she was a question he intended to answer. Bella Adaeze changed her flight. She told herself it was because she wanted to see more of the city. That was true enough to be useful. She walked into him in the corridor outside Mr. O's office on Thursday. Not metaphorically. Literally, she came around the corner with her eyes on her phone and walked directly into the chest of Jeon Ha-rin, who absorbed the impact without moving a centimeter, as though he had been placed there specifically and had no intention of being displaced. His hand shot out and caught her elbow before she stumbled. For 1 second, they were close enough that she could see the faint scar through the left side of his jaw, the ink disappearing beneath his collar, and the fact that his eyes were not, as she had assumed from a distance, black. They were very dark brown, with something in them that was not coldness, but rather the careful management of warmth. "I'm sorry," she said. Reflex. "Don't be." He hadn't released her elbow. "You were in the lobby 2 days ago. You remember that?" "I remember everything that interests me." She extracted her arm gently. He let her. "Most people find that alarming in a stranger." "Most people," he said, with the tone of someone for whom most people was a category they observed rather than inhabited, would have looked back. Something in that landed oddly. Not as a reproach. More like a fact he had been sitting with. "My name is Bella," she said. "You never asked." "I know your name." The calm with which he said it should have sent her in the other direction. Probably. In any reasonable reading of the situation. She looked at him for a moment, this large, still, terrifyingly composed man who apparently already knew her name despite them having never spoken, and she made a calculation. "That's mildly alarming," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. The architecture of a smile that hadn't fully committed yet. "You don't seem alarmed." "I'm excellent at hiding things." He looked at her. "I know," he said quietly. She wasn't sure what to do with that, so she didn't do anything with it. She said, "I need to go." And she went. She felt his gaze on her back until the elevator doors closed. She found the cafe in Insadong by accident on Friday, a narrow place with handwritten menus and a red bean latte that was aggressively good, and she was halfway through her second cup and deep in her journal when the black car pulled up outside. She saw him before he saw her. He was alone except for the man who stayed by the car. No suit today, dark trousers, black shirt with the collar open enough that the tattoo at his throat was visible in the afternoon light. He moved with the same quality she had noticed before, unhurried, but with the efficiency of someone for whom economy of motion was a deliberate choice. He walked inside. He ordered something without looking at the menu. He turned, scanned the room, and found her immediately. He carried his coffee to the table beside hers. Not her table. The adjacent one. He sat down and opened his phone and appeared to read something of great consequence. For minutes passed. "You're watching me," she said, without looking up from her journal. "I'm reading." "You haven't scrolled once." A pause. Then, without looking up from his screen, "The red bean latte is better with oat milk." She looked at her cup. "I'll survive." He set his phone down. Slowly. And then he reached across to the counter edge where a small ceramic jug sat, picked it up, leaned over, and poured a measured amount of oat milk into her cup without asking. She stared at her cup. "That was presumptuous," she said. "Try it." She tried it. It was better. She looked at him. He looked back. Something passed between them that neither of them named. "You changed your flight," he said. "You assumed I had one." "I didn't assume. I checked." Bella set her pen down. "That's the second alarming thing you've said to me." "I prefer thorough." "I'm sure you do." She studied him. The scar. The ink. The eyes that didn't flinch. "Why? Why what? Why check? Why the lobby? Why this cafe?" She gestured between them. "Why me?" He was quiet for a moment, the deliberate quiet of someone choosing their words rather than reaching for the nearest ones. "I've spent 15 years in rooms where every person I meet has already decided what I'm worth to them before I open my mouth. what I can give them, what they can take. He looked at her steadily. You looked at me in a hotel lobby and looked away. Not from fear. Not from strategy. A pause. I wanted to know what that was. Bella held his gaze. It was self-preservation, she said. From me? From anyone who looks at me like that. The almost smile again. Like what? She looked back down at her journal. Like I'm something. The silence that followed lasted several seconds and had considerable weight. You're something, he said finally. Bella did not respond. But she stayed in the cafe for another hour, and so did he, and when she left he stood when she stood, and he did not follow her, but she was aware, with the full surface area of her skin, that he watched her go. His name was Jeon Ha-rin. She had known this since the lobby, since the moment she'd seen his face, and something in her memory had cross-referenced it with the name that circulated in careful conversations, in the lowered voices of powerful men, in the particular quality of silence that fell in rooms he entered. He was 38. He had built the most formidable private empire in Seoul's underground over 15 years, starting from a position of deliberate obscurity and expanding through a combination of ruthlessness and precision that his competitors had perpetually underestimated until it was too late. She had read about him in passing. The way you read about weather systems forming over oceans, with appropriate distance, with the understanding that some forces were simply facts of the world and not yours to engage with. And yet, she saw him twice more that week. Once at a gallery in Jongno, he stood 2 exhibits away from her, hands clasped behind his back, studying a painting of a woman standing alone in a vast field as though it were a problem he was working through. Once at the entrance of the Gyeongbokgung Palace, in the crowd, gone before she could be certain. On Saturday, a black car arrived outside her hotel. She didn't get in. A message came to her phone from a number she hadn't given him. The restaurant I was recommending is closed Sunday. You'll miss the gochujang butter prawns. She did not reply. She found the restaurant herself on Sunday morning. The prawns were obscene. She sat alone at a window table in the thin autumn light and ate them slowly and thought about a man who studied paintings of solitary women and apparently knew her dietary schedule. She texted, "You were right about the prawns." 11 minutes. Then, "I'm usually right." She smiled at her phone. She typed back, "Must be exhausting." This time the reply came in 2 minutes, only when people don't listen. She knew who he was. She knew what he was. She was not a foolish woman. She was a woman who had learned, through 20 years of careful observation, that the most dangerous thing was not the obvious threat, but the slow one. The quiet reordering of your own instincts that happened when someone paid attention to you in a way you had never been paid attention to before. She knew this. She had catalogued it, labeled it, filed it under things to be careful about. And still she texted back. Still she stayed. Still she walked through Seoul's autumn streets feeling something unfamiliar in her chest, not happiness exactly, but the specific, cautious warmth of being regarded, of being the thing someone was thinking about somewhere, in a city she didn't belong to. She had not felt that in 20 years. Maybe never. The gala invitation arrived on the 12th day. Cream stock. Gold letterpress. A dress, apparently, had been arranged. She stood in the hotel room holding it and reading the back come. And told herself 3 separate reasons she would not go. She went. The dress was black. Floor length. Simple in the particular way that only very expensive things were simple, and when she stood in the bathroom mirror it did something she had not expected. It did not transform her. It simply showed her exactly as she was, without apology. She wore her small gold hoops. She smoothed her low bun. She exhaled through her nose. The car came at 7. The grand ballroom of the Jeon Group's annual charity gala was the kind of room that existed to remind you of its own importance. Chandeliers like burning planets. Marble underfoot cold enough to feel through good shoes. 500 guests who own things, not objects, but systems, legislation, the quiet futures of thousands of other people, moving through the space with the easy assurance of those who had never once wondered if they deserved to be somewhere. Bella moved along the edges. She had a glass of champagne she wasn't drinking, and she was managing, she thought, remarkably well, present, composed, not invisible, not performing, simply here, when a man appeared at her elbow with a smile that had clearly been workshopped. "You must be new," he said. Korean, early 40s, the handsome of someone whose appearance was an instrument. "I would have remembered you. I'm just visiting." Seoul or the gala? Both. Shame. He tilted his glass. Shin Dae-won. I'm in, it doesn't matter what I'm in. What matters is that you're the most interesting person in this room, and I'd like to know your name. He leaned slightly closer than necessary. I can be very persuasive. The word persuasive landed with a quality she didn't like. She was about to answer, brief, polite, already scanning the room for the most elegant exit, when the air changed. The music kept playing. The chandeliers kept burning. But something moved through the crowd like a current, a collective small adjustment, and Shin Dae-won's workshopped smile went very still. Ha-rin was standing 15 feet away. He was in all black. He had been across the room until he wasn't, and the transition between those two states had apparently taken no time at all. He was looking at Shin Dae-won. Not at her. At Shin. And the expression on his face was not the careful blankness she had come to expect. It was ice. Total and specific. Shin Dae-won, she noted, had gone 2 shades paler. Ha-rin. Shin's smile returned at half capacity. I didn't realize she was. She isn't something you need to realize, Ha-rin said. Quiet. Which was worse than loud. Dae-won. You'll want to go check on your wife. The implication floated in the air between them like smoke. Shin Dae-won excused himself with the speed of a man who had survived this long by knowing exactly when to leave. Ha-rin crossed the remaining 15 feet. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her for a moment, all of her, the dress, the hoops, the way she was standing, and something in his face shifted the way deep water shifted when something moved below the surface. You came, he said. You invited me. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I. She looked at him. Who is Shin Dae-won? A pause. Someone who understands now what I've been managing to communicate. Which is? He looked at her steadily. That you're not available. The warmth of it moved through her faster than she wanted it to. She made herself hold his gaze. You could have asked me, instead of communicated at him. I'm asking you now. The room kept moving around them. Somewhere a glass was raised. Somewhere a deal was completed in 3 words over canapes. And Jeon Ha-rin was looking at her like the rest of it didn't exist. She put her hand in his. He led her onto the floor, and the crowd parted, and they danced slowly, warmly, his hand at her waist with a certainty that made her feel less like she was being held and more like she was being recognized, and she thought, this is how people disappear into things. Not dramatically. Just like this. One song at a time, one warm hand at a time, until the distance between you and the edge of someone else's world became impossible to measure. Why did you stay in Seoul? He asked quietly, near her ear. I told myself I wanted to see more of the city. And the real reason? She was quiet for a moment. The real reason felt too large to say out loud, she said. He pulled back just enough to look at her face. His thumb moved once, slowly, across her hand. Then don't say it, he said. Just stay. She might have simply stayed, in his orbit, in the warmth of being the person Jeon Ha-rin crossed rooms for, except that while he was pulled aside by one of his men for a quiet word, a woman found her near the east wall of the ballroom. Tall. Korean. Dove gray gown. The smile of someone who had built it from something that wasn't kindness. You're his guest, the woman said. I'm a guest of the gala. Of course. The woman's gaze moved over her slowly, not unkindly, which was almost worse than cruelty. I'm Min Ji-yeon. My husband was Park Sung-woo. He ran the Western operations for Ha-rin for 11 years. A beat. He died 18 months ago. During a restructure. Bella held very still. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, Jeon said. I'm telling you so you understand that the man you're standing with doesn't keep what he doesn't need. Her eyes were calm. He has brought women to these events before. They're present for a season. And then Ha-rin decides they are a liability, and she paused. Disappear. Not dramatically. Just quietly. The way things do, when a man like that decides something is over. She let the sentence settle. Then she turned and walked away, smooth and certain, before Bella could respond. Bella stood very still for a long moment. 20 years of this. The voice changed, the face changed, her father's absence, a school counselor's well-meaning some people just aren't built for, a man she loved at 26 who'd said you're too quiet, Bella, you're too easy to forget, but the message was always the same. You are not something worth keeping. You are a phase. You are temporary. She set her champagne glass down on the nearest surface. She walked toward the exit. She was 20 feet from the doors. His hand closed around her wrist. The ballroom went quiet in the gradual, collective way that important things registered among crowds. One person noticing, then the next. The music still played. The chandeliers still burned. But 500 conversations dropped half a decibel and 500 pairs of eyes found the same point in the room. She turned. Ha-rin was close. Closer than he had been all evening. Close enough that she could see the controlled effort in his jaw, the way his eyes were doing everything they could not to let her see how much ground he had just covered to reach her. Whatever she said to you, he said quietly, was not the truth. She said you don't keep people who become liabilities. A beat. She was describing someone she knew, he said. Not me. Not anymore. How do I know the difference? He held her gaze. You don't. Not yet. And then, because he was apparently a man who had decided, finally, to use his words, I have walked into rooms that feared me for 15 years. I have sat across tables from people who would have handed me anything I asked for. And I have never, not once, moved quickly for any of it. His thumb moved across the inside of her wrist. I crossed this room in 4 seconds, Bella. In front of everyone here who has spent years watching me to understand what I value. He exhaled slowly. Now they know. And I need you to understand that I know what I've done. Her throat was tight. You've made me a target, she said. Yes. You've told the entire room that I matter to you. Yes. That's not, she stopped. Breathed. Ha-rin. That's not a small thing. People like Choi Byum-suk. He went very still. Where did you hear that name? I hear things, she said. I'm invisible. People talk freely around me. She looked at him steadily. He's the one who's been watching you. He's been waiting for you to show weakness. And she gestured at the room, at the 500 witnesses, at the 4 seconds it had taken him to cross it. You just handed him one. Ha-rin stared at her. You know about Choi, he said slowly. I told you. People talk. She held his gaze. I'm not a woman who needs protecting from information. I need protecting from what comes next. The expression that moved through his face was something she hadn't seen before. Not surprise exactly. Something closer to the specific wonder of a man who had expected one thing and been handed something entirely different and better. Then let me protect you from what comes next, he said. Promise me you'll ask before you decide what that looks like. Agreed. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned her wrist, not away, but toward him, and held his hand properly, with intention. Choosing. Something moved across his face that she had no word for yet. She had the feeling she would spend a long time learning its name. She was watching from everywhere they couldn't see her, as she always had. If you're watching this from outside South Korea right now, pause and drop your city in the comments. We love knowing where our besties are watching from. And if this story already has you by the heart, Tap subscribe so you never miss us. Back to the story. Choi Byum-suk had not come to the gala. He didn't need to. He had people there, 3 of them, stationed near the bar, dressed in the anonymous elegance of men who attended events like this for the observation rather than the occasion. They had photographed Ha-rin crossing the room. They had noted the 4 seconds. They had sent the image to Choi's phone at 9:47 p.m., and Choi had looked at it for a long time before setting his phone face down on his desk. He had been waiting 2 years for this. Not for a woman specifically. For evidence of something Ha-rin valued more than the empire. Because empires could withstand almost everything except the moment their builder found something he wouldn't sacrifice. Choi Byum-suk had built his career on understanding exactly that moment. He began making arrangements. Ha-rin moved her to a different hotel the next morning, quieter, less visible, 2 floors of his people operating in the building's structure in ways the front desk didn't know about. He sat with her while she packed the small amount she'd unpacked and told her what he knew about Choi in the flat, unadorned way of someone who had decided honesty was the only offering he had left. He ran Eastern operations for 8 years, Ha-rin said. When I restructured 18 months ago, consolidated control, removed several positions, Choi was one of the people displaced. He didn't fight it publicly. He's been building something privately since. Jeon, Bella said. Ha-rin's jaw tightened. She was Park Sung-woo's wife. Sung-woo was a casualty of the restructure. I didn't order it. Someone beneath me did, and I dealt with that. But Jeon doesn't believe the distinction. Bella folded a sweater into her bag. And Choi is using her grief. Yes, because she has access to events like last night. Social access. Yes. She zipped her bag. Straightened. Okay. She turned to face him. I need to know 2 things. First, is there anyone in your immediate circle who would sell information to Choi? Ha-rin looked at her carefully. Possibly. Then we need to assume he already knows which hotel I was in and has someone watching the move to the new one. She picked up her bag. Second thing, I need to call my office in London and tell them I'm extending my leave. If Choi finds out my professional identity, I don't want my colleagues exposed. He was still watching her with that expression. You've done this before. No, she said. But I've spent 20 years watching powerful people move through rooms and assume no one small was paying attention. I've been paying attention. She met his gaze. Take me to the new hotel. And on the way, tell me everything about Choi that you haven't told anyone else. He took her to the new hotel. He told her everything. The danger came on Tuesday, and Bella had been expecting it. Not at Buckshin specifically. She hadn't predicted the location, but she had spent Sunday and Monday constructing a mental map of Choi's most likely moves, and the one consistent conclusion was that he would go for leverage rather than violence. Hurting her would provoke Ha-rin beyond calculation. But using her as a message demonstrating access would create exactly the fear Choi needed to regain influence. She went to Buckshin because she refused to stop living while she waited for a man she hadn't met to decide she was an instrument. She had Ha-rin's driver. She had a phone with 2 numbers memorized. She had, in the inner pocket of her jacket, a small device Ha-rin's head of security had handed her that morning without explanation, a panic signal, the size of a coin. She had been in the village 20 minutes when the car pulled up. 2 men. Polite in the particular way of people who had done this before, the politeness of a foregone conclusion. Ms. Adaeze, the first one said. Mr. Choi would like a word. Bella did not reach for the coin. Not yet. She looked at them, calculating, cataloging, and she got in the car. Choi Byum-suk's office was on the upper floor of a building she couldn't have found on a map, and he was, as she had expected from everything Ha-rin had told her, a man in his late 50s who had the bearing of someone who had made peace, long ago, with his own nature. His face was a closed door. His suit was expensive in a way that was about function rather than display. He looked at her across a table with nothing on it. You're not what I expected, he said. That's a common mistake, Bella said. What did you expect? Someone frightened. The night is young. He almost smiled. He cares about you. I know. That makes you dangerous to him. And him unpredictable to everyone else. He folded his hands. I have been managing the consequences of Jeon Ha-rin's decisions for 8 years. I know what he looks like when something matters to him. I know what he does. He paused. He burns things. People. Structures. Anything that stands between him and what he's decided is his. And the collateral in those burns, another pause, is significant. Bella looked at him steadily. You're telling me people die when Ha-rin protects things? Yes. And you think removing me protects everyone else? I think, Choi said carefully, that you're an intelligent woman who understands pragmatism. Bella was quiet for a moment. She could feel the coin in her pocket. She had pressed it quietly when she got into the car. One press, the signal for I'm moving, I'm okay, don't come yet. 2 presses would bring her in. She wasn't ready for 2 presses. Not yet. You're afraid, she said. Choi's eyes sharpened. Not of me, she continued. Of what happens to the structure when the man who built it starts making decisions from here. She touched her chest instead of here. She touched her head. You built your career on understanding that moment. You watched it happen with other men. And now you see it happening with him, and you think, if she's gone, I can rebalance it. She tilted her head slightly. But here's the thing, Mr. Choi. You're wrong about the mechanism. He was very still. Removing me doesn't stabilize Ha-rin. It detonates him. She held his gaze. I'm the reason he's been making careful decisions for the last 2 weeks. I am the thing that is currently making him think before he acts. A pause. Remove me, and you get the version of Jeon Ha-rin who has nothing to lose. Is that the rebalancing you're planning for? The silence stretched. Choi looked at her for a long time. His hands, still folded on the table, did not move. He'll come for you anyway, he said finally. Yes, she said. That was never the question. She reached into her pocket and held the coin where he could see it. The question is whether you want him to come here angry or whether you want to make a different kind of arrangement. Choi looked at the coin. Then he looked at her. What kind of arrangement, he said slowly, did you have in mind? Ha-rin found her in 41 minutes. She was still at the table. The coin was back in her pocket. Choi was across from her, and whatever the 41 minutes had contained for him privately, his expression when the door opened and Ha-rin walked through it was the expression of a man who had made a calculation and arrived at a conclusion he hadn't started with. Ha-rin crossed the room. He didn't touch Choi. He didn't look at Choi. He looked at Bella, all of her, systematically, hands to face, face to posture, and what she saw move through him was not relief. Relief was too small. It was a seismic thing, a reordering of something structural. I'm fine, she said. He pulled her up from the chair and held her, not gently, the way you held breakable things, but firmly, the way you held things you had decided to keep, and she felt the tension in his body like a frequency with nowhere to go. I pressed the coin once, she said into his shoulder. I needed time. I know. His voice was rougher than she had ever heard it. My people watched the building. I waited. You waited, she repeated, pulling back to look at him. You actually waited. You asked me to ask before I decided what protection looked like. The muscle in his jaw moved. I was asking. Something shifted in her chest. Something old and careful and long-held that she had stopped expecting anyone to honor. She looked at Choi over Ha-rin's shoulder. Choi met her eyes and inclined his head very slightly, a motion that contained, she thought, something approaching respect. He and I, Bella said to Ha-rin, have the beginning of an understanding. Ha-rin turned to look at Choi. She proposed it, Choi said. I'm inclined to consider it. Ha-rin looked between them. And then, slowly, the tension in his shoulders shifted, not disappeared, but changed quality, from crisis to something else. You negotiated, he said to Bella. I had 41 minutes. He stared at her. You negotiated, he said again. Quieter. Choi's objection isn't to me, she said. It's to unpredictability. Give him a seat at the table, a real one, with real information, not the scraps he's been managing on, and the incentive structure changes. She looked at Ha-rin steadily. He doesn't want you detonated. He wants to be inside the radius of your decisions, not outside them. The silence lasted several seconds. Ha-rin looked at Choi. She's right. Regrettably, Choi said, and there was something in it that was almost dry humor, yes. They left the building together, just the two of them, Ha-rin's men a respectful distance behind. The Seoul evening was doing what Seoul evenings did, lit warmly, moving fast, indifferent to the particular weight of two people walking through it. He didn't speak for a block. She didn't push. Then, I need to tell you something. She waited. Sung-woo. He said the name carefully. Park Sung-woo. He died during a restructure. I told you it was someone beneath me. That was true. A pause. What I didn't tell you is that I knew the risk when I made the restructure. I knew Sung-woo's position put him in the path of it, and I made the calculation anyway. He was looking straight ahead. I could have moved him first. Protected him. I chose efficiency. Bella walked beside him. Why are you telling me this now? Because you just spent 41 minutes in a room with the consequences of that calculation, talking your way through it, and you deserve to know the full shape of what you walked into. He stopped, turned to face her. The streetlight made the scar on his jaw very clear. I am not a good man, Bella. I have been trying to be careful not to let you believe I am. She looked at him. I know, she said. I've known. And I'm here. She held his gaze. I'm not here because you're good. I'm here because you're honest about what you are. And because you waited 41 minutes. She tilted her head slightly. Do better with Choi than you did with Sung-woo. A long pause. That's it, he said. That's it. He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the one that appeared when she did something he hadn't calculated for, and he was recalibrating everything downstream. She found she liked it on him. She found she liked being the variable in his equations. He reached up and touched her face. One hand, palm against her jaw, thumb brushing the corner of her cheek. She leaned into it, just slightly. He kissed her, not as a question, not as a test, but as a conclusion. This, finally, after 15 years of building something empty and efficient and vast, this is what I was building toward, this person, this warmth, this particular gravity. She answered him without hesitation. The city kept moving around them. Later. Ha-rin's apartment was on the 32nd floor, and the city below it was doing what cities did, breathing, burning, absolutely indifferent to the two people watching it from the window. Bella was curled in the chair. Ha-rin was on the floor beside her because he had simply sat down there, his shoulder against her knee, and she had looked at him for a moment, this feared man, this empire, sitting on the floor beside her chair, and had said nothing. Because there was nothing that needed saying. My father left when I was 3, she said, after a while. My mother worked 2 jobs and sent money home and loved me more than I knew what to do with, and she was always tired. And I learned very young that the smallest thing I could do, the most useful, the most loving, was take up as little space as possible. He turned to look at her. So I practiced, she said. I got very good at it. At being the background. She looked down at him. And then you looked at me in a hotel lobby and I panicked, because nobody looks at me like that. Like I'm the thing they were looking for. He was quiet for a moment. My father ran what I run now, he said. He taught me that caring about things was the most efficient way to lose them. That the only things worth building were things you could walk away from cleanly. He looked at the city. I built accordingly. Very large. Very empty. Very efficient. A pause. And then you told me you were nobody, in a corridor in Gangnam, and I felt he stopped. I felt something I have no adequate word for. Like fury. Like recognition. Like something in me said, wrong. Bella put her hand on his shoulder. He covered it with his own. They stayed like that for a long time, The city below them, the warmth between them, the particular quiet of two people who had spent a long time alone and were still learning, carefully, what it meant not to be. 3 months later, Bella was at the window of an apartment that belonged to both of them, Seoul-facing, 32nd floor, hers by gravity and choice, and two people who had decided to stop practicing distance. With a coffee in her hand and a view she was still not used to and a feeling in her chest that she was only now finding language for. Ha-rin came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her from behind, put his chin on her shoulder. "Meeting at 9, he said. "You say that every day." "It's true every day." She leaned back into him, slightly. "Choi is coming at 10. "I know." He texted. A pause. "He called you formidable." "He called me pragmatically formidable. He doesn't give that to anyone." She smiled at the window. "I know." He pressed his mouth to her temple. Stayed there for a moment. "Then, there's a restaurant in Mapo. The one you've been mentioning for 3 weeks. I've been building anticipation. You've been driving me insane." "Same thing." She turned in his arms and looked up at him, this man who had waited 41 minutes, who had told her the full shape of his history, who sat on floors and poured oat milk and crossed rooms and kept the promises he made. And she felt the old smallness rise up one final time, trying to pull her back, trying to make her fold herself down. She let it pass. "I love you," she said, because she was done being small. Done saving things for later. Done assuming there would not be enough room for her. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had spent 3 months learning the name of. It was called home. "I know," he said. And then, because he had spent 3 months learning that love was a thing you said with your mouth and not just with your actions, "I love you, Bella." I've been building toward that sentence for some time. "How long?" "Since a hotel lobby in Gangnam." He said it without hesitation. "Since you looked at me and looked away, and I took one step toward you before my phone pulled me back, and I spent the next 3 weeks trying to understand why I couldn't stop thinking about a woman who had looked away." She stared at him. "You took a step," she said. "Yes." "In the lobby." "That first day." "Yes." She pressed her forehead to his collarbone and laughed, quietly, to herself, the laugh of a woman who had been seen from the very first moment and hadn't known it. He held her. Outside, Seoul kept moving. Inside, something was very still and very certain. 6 months after a rainy Tuesday and a hotel lobby in Gangnam, Bella Adaeze stood in a courtyard in Jeju at golden hour. Ivory that moved like water. Her gold hoops. Her low bun. A sky doing something extraordinary in amber and rose above a courtyard full of the people Ha-rin had trusted with this, which was a small and carefully chosen number, because that was who he was and she had long since stopped wanting him to be otherwise. Ha-rin stood across from her. He did not look at the sky or the courtyard or the small and carefully chosen people. He looked at her. He had looked at her. She was beginning to understand, since a Tuesday morning 3 weeks before a gala, since a hotel lobby, since a corridor in Gangnam where she had walked into his chest and apologized on reflex, and he had decided, in some private and absolute way, that he would spend whatever remained of his life making sure she never had cause to apologize for existing again. The officiant spoke. Ha-rin held her hands. When it was done, he slid a ring onto her finger, simple gold, warm weight, no excess, and leaned close and said something quiet, something only for her, something she would carry for the rest of her life. He said, "You have never been nobody. You were just in rooms that weren't paying attention. I have been paying attention since the first day. I intend to pay attention for the rest of them." Bella Adaeze, who had learned, at 3 years old, that some people did not stay, who had spent 20 years making herself small so that no one would notice when she was left, who had come to Seoul to collect the last conversation she would ever have with her mother, and had walked out of that building and into the chest of a man who had taken one step toward her before the world pulled him back, and who had spent the next 3 weeks finding his way back to her. She had not been the background. She had been the whole story. She had simply been waiting for a room that was paying attention. She was done waiting. Besties, if that ending just did something to you good, share this story with someone who needs to believe she's not invisible. Subscribe to Venom and Velvet Stories for a brand new dark romance every week, because you deserve a love that crosses rooms, waits 41 minutes, and pays attention from the very first day. Drop a comment and tell us, what was the moment you knew Ha-rin was gone for her? We'll be reading every single one. Venom and Velvet Stories, where love is dangerous and devotion is absolute.